A recently published scientific report has revealed something truly unsettling about the interstellar traveler known as 3I Atlas. When it was about 2.1 astronomical units away from the Sun, this object suddenly began releasing hydrogen cyanide, a deadly, invisible gas. Scientists refer to this as outgassing. But here's the strange part. Comets aren't supposed to behave like this. They don't suddenly exhale poison at a perfect distance from the Sun, as if following a command. Yet, Atlas did exactly that. Right when this strange activity began, one of NASA's asteroid tracking spacecrafts mysteriously went offline. Its most important data, the very images that could have shown what happened, vanished from the public database. Was it a technical failure or something intentionally hidden? Tonight, we'll dig into what the blackout might have been covering up. Imagine being an astronomer scanning the sky, tracking what seems like an ordinary comet made of ice and dust. Then, one morning, you see data that chills your blood. The object you've been watching suddenly releases a massive cloud of hydrogen cyanide all at once, as if a hidden switch had been flipped. This isn't theory, it's confirmed observation. On September 14, 2025, the James Clerk Maxwell Telescope recorded strong hydrogen cyanide signals coming from 3I Atlas at a distance of 2.13 astronomical units. The data was so precise that the odds of it being an error were less than 1 in a million. In simple terms, the comet was spewing quadrillions upon quadrillions of cyanide molecules into space every single second. Hydrogen cyanide isn't something unknown to science. It's the same compound that gives certain seeds a faint almond smell, but in concentrated form, it's lethal. It blocks the body's ability to use oxygen, causing suffocation from within. Yet, it also exists naturally in comets, sealed inside their icy cores and released slowly as they heat up near the Sun. What's shocking here isn't the presence of cyanide, it's the timing and speed of its release. Through August 2025, when Atlas was colder and farther from the Sun, scientists looked for this gas, using the same instruments, and found nothing. The telescope's readings were silent, but only a few weeks later, at 2.1 astronomical units, the signal appeared out of nowhere, bright, strong, undeniable. There was no gradual buildup, no slow warming trend. One moment the comet was quiet, the next it was alive. It's like watching a volcano that's been cold for centuries suddenly erupt without warning. No tremors, no heat, just instant fury. What could trigger that kind of transformation? Most comets follow a predictable pattern as they heat up. Water vapor appears first, then carbon monoxide, followed by other gases depending on their melting points. But Atlas ignored all those rules. It skipped straight to releasing hydrogen cyanide, one of the most toxic substances known at a distance where most comets are still frozen. Now consider a thought that sounds wild, but may not be impossible. What if Atlas isn't just a natural rock? What if it's something built, a dormant probe or artifact that activates when it reaches a precise point in its orbit? What if what we're seeing isn't just outgassing, but the startup sequence of some internal system designed long ago? It's easy to dismiss such ideas as fantasy, but there are too many coincidences to ignore. NASA's Psyche spacecraft, which had the best chance to capture clear images of Atlas during that same period, suddenly stopped transmitting data. At the same time, the comet's tail began behaving in ways that defied physics, pointing toward the Sun instead of away from it. And the European Space Agency quietly delayed releasing their spectral data from Mars orbit, citing technical reviews. When you place these events side by side, they form a pattern, one that suggests there's more to Atlas than frozen dust. Some researchers have started to ask bold questions. Could this be evidence of an engineered object? Are space agencies deliberately downplaying what they've seen? And if so, why? Before we get to that, we need to talk about what happened during what scientists now call the Silent Week, a 7-day window when Psyche went dark. The spacecraft, launched in 2023 to study the metallic asteroid Psyche between Mars and Jupiter, carries cameras, spectrometers, and magnetic sensors capable of observing other celestial bodies as well. In early September 2025, 3I Atlas passed remarkably close to Psyche's flight path. The geometry was perfect for observation. The comet would have been bright, large, and close enough for Psyche's instruments to record detailed surface imagery, the kind that ground telescopes could never match. This should have been the most revealing moment of the entire mission. But when that window came, the signal went silent. No new images appeared. The mission's normally active public archive, where fresh data is uploaded for scientists and journalists, showed nothing for that week. The timing could not have been more suspicious. Just as Atlas switched on, our eyes in space went blind. And that, many believe, is where the real story begins, not with the gas, but with the silence surrounding it. When researchers reviewed the public image archive of NASA's Psyche mission, they found something that made no sense at all: a full week missing from the record. Between September 1st and September 7th, 2025, there were no images uploaded, no technical logs, no calibration tests, nothing. The spacecraft, which had been consistently sending data, suddenly went completely silent right when the comet 3I Atlas was at its closest point. Of course, there are normal explanations for data gaps in space missions. Spacecraft sometimes enter standby mode for software updates, power management, or safety checks. The Deep Space Network occasionally shifts antennas, creating short communication delays. In rare cases, a glitch can force a spacecraft into safe mode, temporarily pausing all non-essential functions until ground teams regain control. And sometimes, new images simply take time to process before being uploaded publicly. But this case was different. NASA never gave any explanation for that missing week. There was no technical update, no status report, not even a single tweet mentioning maintenance. It's as if that period simply vanished from the record, a silence that no one seemed willing to address. For a mission as closely monitored as Psyche, that absence stood out like a black hole in the timeline. If the missing data had been caused by a simple glitch, NASA could have said so. They could have explained it as a planned calibration pause or even a data relay issue. But they didn't. The total silence about that blackout makes one wonder, was this incompetence? Or was it something they didn't want the world to see? The timing only deepens the mystery. Just 10 days after that blackout, 3I Atlas began releasing hydrogen cyanide into space, an abrupt and violent activation that shocked astronomers. During that silent week, the comet would have been close enough for Psyche's cameras to capture incredibly detailed surface images. By the time communications resumed, Atlas was already moving away and showing strange chemical behavior. It's almost as if that critical transition, the moment when Atlas switched on, was deliberately hidden. If the object was undergoing some kind of physical change, or even activating something internal, those signs would have been visible only in high-resolution images taken at close range. Ground telescopes can't show detail beyond a small, blurry point of light. But Psyche could have. And just when that opportunity arose, the data went dark. Now imagine, for a moment, a possible scenario. What if Atlas began displaying structural patterns that didn't look natural? Openings or vents appearing in specific geometric positions, controlled bursts of gas from defined points rather than random surface vents, panels or patterns that looked more mechanical than geological. If Psyche captured such images, they would immediately raise alarms not only within NASA, but within defense agencies that monitor space for artificial objects. In such a case, would those images ever reach the public archive? Probably not. They'd likely be classified, reviewed by multiple agencies, and released only after heavy filtering, if at all. The idea sounds speculative, but the facts fit the pattern. A week of total silence, followed by a chemical outburst that no natural model can easily explain. This kind of information management isn't a clumsy cover-up. It's a quiet, careful filtering of knowledge. Data gaps, delayed releases, low-resolution images replacing high-quality ones, endless review periods that stretch on for months, all are part of a subtle system designed to control what the public sees and when they see it. While the world remains unaware, Atlas keeps moving closer to the sun. Its toxic cloud expands, growing brighter and more unstable. Whatever is happening out there, the agencies with the tools to observe it aren't sharing the full story. And that missing week, the moment when our only nearby spacecraft went silent, may have been the key to understanding everything. But this was only the first anomaly. The next part of the mystery is even stranger, because when scientists turned their attention to Atlas's tail, they found something that broke the most basic rule of comet physics. Comets are supposed to behave in simple, predictable ways. Each has a solid nucleus made of ice, rock, and dust. As it approaches the sun, its surface heats up, releasing gas and debris into space. The solar wind, a constant flow of charged particles from the sun, pushes this material away, forming the comet's glowing tail. No matter how a comet moves, its tail always points away from the sun. This is a law of physics that has held true for centuries. But in the summer of 2025, the Hubble Space Telescope observed 3I Atlas doing something completely unexpected. Its tail appeared to be pointing toward the sun. Astronomers call this phenomenon an anti-tail. In rare cases, such illusions happen when Earth passes through a comet's orbital plane. The geometry can make part of the dust trail seem to angle forward instead of back. But those anti-tails are usually faint and short-lived. Atlas's, however, was bright, sharp, and persistent. The geometry didn't match any known viewing illusion. Amateur astronomers around the world began noticing other oddities too. Short, uneven bursts of gas, jet-like emissions, and a tail that seemed to vanish and reappear as if the comet were pulsing. Some nights, Atlas looked ordinary. Other nights, it looked like something entirely different. Whatever Atlas truly is, it's not behaving like a normal comet. And the deeper scientists look, the more it seems that this mysterious visitor from the stars might not be just a traveler, but something far more deliberate. On some nights, Atlas looked lively, its tail glowing faintly against the darkness, small bursts of gas flickering from the nucleus. But other nights, at the exact same distance from the sun, it appeared completely still, just a dim point of light with almost no surrounding glow. That kind of inconsistency is not what comets normally do. Once a comet starts venting gas and dust, its activity tends to remain steady, following a clear pattern tied to solar heat. It doesn't switch on and off like a flickering bulb unless something very strange is happening inside it. Compare that behavior to another comet from the same year, Comet Swan, officially Citwade 25R2. Swan behaved like a model student of comet physics. It developed a huge bright coma, a perfect streaming tail, and a consistent pattern of gas release that matched textbook expectations. Photographers around the world captured stunning images showing expanding shells of gas around its core, perfectly synchronized with its slow rotation as sunlight reached new layers of ice. Atlas was the complete opposite. Its glow faded and returned unpredictably. Its tail appeared in unnatural directions. When you place images of Swan and Atlas side by side, it's hard to believe they belong to the same family of objects. Swan looks like a comet. Atlas looks like something trying to imitate one. So, what could explain this bizarre behavior? There are a few scientific possibilities, at least, at first glance. One idea is fragmentation. If Atlas's icy core were breaking apart, small chunks could drift away, each reacting differently to sunlight. This could cause uneven bursts of brightness. But such events usually leave visible traces: multiple cores, clouds of debris, sudden spikes in luminosity followed by a gradual fade. None of these signs have been clearly observed in Atlas. Another possibility is rapid rotation. If the comet spins with a few specific vents or cracks on its surface, the outgassing might appear irregular as those vents rotate into sunlight and then away. That could explain the flickering, but it still doesn't solve the biggest mystery: the anti-tail, which sometimes points toward the sun. Rotation alone can't cause that. Some scientists have suggested that magnetic forces might play a role. The solar wind is not just light, it's a storm of charged particles carrying magnetic fields. If Atlas happens to produce unusually charged dust or gas, electromagnetic forces could push that material in odd directions, temporarily overpowering the normal pressure from sunlight. It's a fascinating theory, but it would require Atlas to be chemically very unusual, unlike any comet we've studied before. Which leads to a much more unsettling idea. What if these emissions aren't random or natural at all? What if the jets of gas are controlled, released intentionally at specific angles, almost like nozzles directing thrust? Imagine a spacecraft adjusting its orientation in space with small bursts of gas. The exhaust doesn't flow according to sunlight or gravity. It goes exactly where the engines are aimed. If Atlas is doing something similar, those sudden flashes, the uneven plumes, and even the anti-tail could be the visible result of controlled motion. That would mean Atlas isn't just reacting to its environment, it's responding to it. It's behaving as if it has a purpose. If that's true, then 3I Atlas might not be just another piece of cosmic debris. It could be something built, a relic or probe, ancient or recent, programmed to awaken and act under specific conditions. And if it truly has some level of control or propulsion, that changes everything. It wouldn't just be an astronomical curiosity. It would be a potential contact event, or worse, a potential threat. But before we jump to conclusions, we have to look at how the major space agencies have handled the evidence. Because what comes next is even more suspicious. In early October 2025, as Atlas passed near Mars just about 5 million miles away, the European Space Agency had a golden opportunity to study it up close. Two of their spacecraft were already orbiting Mars, the ExoMars Trace Gas Orbiter and Mars Express. Both are equipped with powerful cameras and sensors capable of analyzing distant gases and particles in space. ESA publicly announced they would attempt to observe Atlas, taking images and measuring its composition. Everything sounded transparent and routine. When the flyby occurred, the agency released a few images on October 7th, showing a small glowing point moving across the stars. The press celebrated it as a success, proof that humanity had once again managed to track an interstellar visitor. But when you look closely at those images, something feels off. They're astonishingly low-quality fuzzy dots, almost pixelated, showing none of the detail that ESA's equipment is normally capable of. The same spacecraft that routinely delivers razor-sharp images of Martian valleys and dust storms suddenly produced results that looked like they came from the 1980s. And then came the strangest announcement of all. The spectroscopic data, the real science, the readings that would tell us what gases Atlas was producing. What elements and isotopes made it up would take several months to analyze before release. Months, not weeks. For an agency that has processed more complex data sets in far less time, that kind of delay made no sense. It looked less like standard procedure and more like a stall, as if the data contained something unexpected, something they weren't ready to share. So now we're left with three patterns repeating themselves. NASA's blackout during Atlas's activation, the comet's impossible tail behavior, and ESA's vague, low-resolution data releases. When seen separately, each could be written off as coincidence. But together, they form a troubling picture, one that suggests something extraordinary is moving through our solar system, and that the world's leading space agencies might be keeping more secrets than they're willing to admit. In theory, spectroscopy is simple science. You point a spectrometer toward a distant object, collect its light, and study the pattern of wavelengths. Each element and molecule leaves its own fingerprint absorption or emission lines that reveal exactly what's there. It's standard, routine work for any observatory. Even if the data requires calibration or fine-tuning, it's a matter of weeks, not months. So why the delay in releasing Atlas's spectral data? What could possibly take that long to verify? The simplest answer might also be the most troubling. The data contains something they weren't expecting. We already know Atlas is venting huge amounts of hydrogen cyanide, but what else could be mixed in? Are there other strange compounds, chemical signatures that don't match natural processes? Are the isotopic ratios different from anything known in our solar system? Could there be molecules that hint at an artificial origin, substances that don't occur anywhere in nature? These are the questions spectroscopy could easily answer. And these are the answers the European Space Agency seems in no hurry to share. By delaying the release, they maintain full control over how the story unfolds. When the data finally appears, it will come pre-packaged, carefully worded, and framed to avoid alarming conclusions. Nothing about that is technically a cover-up, but it's a form of soft censorship, a way to manage public understanding, while keeping the most sensitive details quiet. It's not the first time ESA has done this. When their Mars Express orbiter detected methane on Mars, they released the data within weeks, sparking open debate among scientists about whether it hinted at biological or geological activity. When the Trace Gas Orbiter discovered water vapor high in the Martian atmosphere, the results were published quickly and proudly. Those findings were exciting, but safe. They didn't challenge humanity's place in the universe. Atlas, on the other hand, does. An interstellar object suddenly releasing toxic gas near Earth's orbit is unprecedented and deeply unsettling. If its composition turns out to include materials that look manufactured, or if its structure doesn't match anything naturally formed, it would be one of the most important discoveries in human history. It would also cause chaos. Imagine the questions that would immediately follow. Who built it? Why is it here? How long has it been traveling? Is it observing us or preparing something worse? No government or institution on Earth is ready to answer those questions, much less handle the public reaction. So, the data stays locked up. ESA and NASA share information constantly. If the Atlas readings showed anything truly extraordinary, they wouldn't just be passed to scientists, they'd be escalated to higher levels of government. Classified meetings would happen behind closed doors. Analysts would double-check everything, not necessarily because anyone's trying to hide the truth, but because that's how bureaucracies handle potential global shocks, with caution, control, and delay. Because let's face it, if humanity ever confirmed that an artificial object was moving through our solar system, it would shake every institution to its core. It would rewrite science, religion, defense strategy, and geopolitics overnight. So ESA takes the slow path. They release a few blurry pictures. They tell the public that analysis takes time. They promise that results will come eventually, just not yet. Meanwhile, Atlas keeps drifting inward, moving closer to the Sun and closer to Earth. But we don't have to wait for their data to see that something's off. We already have patterns, comparisons, and behavior that don't make sense for any known comet. And one question keeps rising above all others. If Atlas really were just a normal comet, why does it behave nothing like one? Before we explore that comparison, though, there's an even darker possibility that can't be ignored. What if that hydrogen cyanide cloud isn't just a byproduct of chemistry, but something more deliberate? Let's talk about what scientists are now calling the weaponized cyanide hypothesis. It sounds like something from a sci-fi thriller, a comet that doubles as a delivery system for poison gas. But the math deserves attention. Atlas is releasing hydrogen cyanide at a rate of roughly 4 times 10 to the 25th molecules every second. That's an unfathomable number. In just 1 hour, that amount of gas could fill several Olympic-sized swimming pools. Over the span of days or weeks, it becomes a massive, expanding cloud drifting through the void. Of course, space is enormous, and gas expands quickly in a vacuum. The further it spreads, the thinner it becomes. By the time any trace of that cloud reached Earth, it would be so diffuse it could barely be detected, let alone pose a real threat. The physics of dispersion follow a simple rule: double the distance, and the density drops to a quarter. Multiply that over millions of miles, and the gas practically disappears into nothing. Even if a dense portion of that cloud somehow entered Earth's atmosphere, it wouldn't survive the journey. Hydrogen cyanide would burn up or break apart high above the surface, leaving harmless atoms behind. The idea of it reaching the ground in lethal concentrations is practically impossible. To make that happen, you'd need precision targeting, a deliberate, continuous release aligned perfectly with Earth's orbit. And even then, atmospheric friction would destroy most of it long before entry. In short, whatever Atlas is doing out there, it's not poisoning our world, at least, not in the physical sense. But the possibility that this gas is being released intentionally, under control, or as part of a process we don't understand, that's what truly disturbs scientists. Because if the hydrogen cyanide cloud is not a coincidence of chemistry, then it might be a message or a mechanism. And in either case, that changes everything. Now comes the question that changes everything: could this kind of event ever be intentional? What if Atlas isn't just a wandering rock, but something built, something capable of adjusting its path and releasing gas on command? Could it, in theory, direct a concentrated cloud of poison toward a chosen target? It sounds like pure science fiction, but in terms of physics, it's not impossible. Imagine for a moment that Atlas has some form of propulsion, nothing dramatic, just a subtle way of steering itself, using its own outgassing as thrust. Tiny course corrections, invisible from Earth, could shift its orbit slightly over time. With enough precision, it could align its closest point to the Sun so that its trajectory crosses Earth's path at just the right moment. Then, at that exact time, it could release a dense burst of hydrogen cyanide, not evenly in all directions, but focused like a jet or nozzle. The gas would spread out, but along a controlled path, expanding exactly where Earth is predicted to pass. It would be orbital mechanics meeting chemical precision, the cold math of space combined with the deadly logic of engineering. For such a maneuver, Atlas would need a few basic components. First, propulsion. That could be as simple as releasing gas unevenly to create small thrust, something our own spacecraft already do. If Atlas can open or close vents to control that flow, it can nudge its orbit as needed. Second, targeting. It would need to know Earth's position and predict where we'll be months ahead. Information any advanced civilization with astronomical knowledge could easily calculate. Third, timing. The release would need to occur at an exact point, so the expanding cloud crosses Earth's orbit at the right time. Again, this isn't fantasy, it's just precision engineering and timing. Now consider this. The sudden activation of hydrogen cyanide emissions at 2.1 astronomical units from the Sun might not have been random at all. It could have been a systems test, a way for Atlas to check its internal components after a long, silent journey through interstellar space. like powering up an old engine to make sure it still works. Think of it as a wake-up sequence. The probe powers on, releases a controlled burst, monitors the chemical spread, and observes how we react from Earth. It gathers data. Then it continues inward, refining its path and waiting for the perfect moment closer to the Sun, when its natural activity would provide perfect camouflage. If that's true, then the hydrogen cyanide release we saw in September might have been nothing less than a pre-deployment test. And that means we're not observing a random object, we're witnessing a system executing its mission. That's not a passive threat. That's an active one. Something aware of its environment. Something following programmed steps. There's another angle worth thinking about. The exhaust analogy. If Atlas has any kind of internal engine, whether for propulsion, power generation, or communication, it would produce waste gases. Hydrogen cyanide could easily be one of them. Just like a car's exhaust reveals how its engine works, these emissions might be the chemical fingerprint of something mechanical operating inside. So when astronomers detected that sudden wave of hydrogen cyanide, what they might have been seeing wasn't a comet heating up, but an engine turning on. This theory doesn't claim certainty, but it does explain what normal comet science cannot. A silent, frozen object traveling for who knows how long suddenly wakes up at a precise distance from the Sun, emits toxic gas, and defies every expected physical behavior. If you connect the dots, the timeline looks chillingly coherent. Atlas enters the solar system, appearing completely inert, a perfect disguise. It travels for years, conserving energy, avoiding detection. As it approaches the Sun, its systems begin to sense increasing radiation and distance markers. When it reaches a preset threshold, roughly 2.1 astronomical units, it activates. Internal reservoirs open. Chemical reactions begin. Hydrogen cyanide is expelled, part test, part exhaust. Observers on Earth detect the anomaly, assume it's natural, and move on. Meanwhile, Atlas continues its journey, adjusting course, heading for its next key point, its perihelion, about 1.36 astronomical units from the Sun. There, the heat and solar energy will be greatest, the perfect time for another, larger burst. And if Earth happens to pass through that zone at the wrong moment, we could encounter the edge of that cloud without even realizing what it truly is. Of course, this scenario requires major assumptions. It assumes Atlas was made, not formed. It assumes intelligence, intention, and technology far beyond ours. But at some point, when every normal explanation fails to fit, logic forces us to consider the uncomfortable possibilities. Because the list of anomalies keeps growing: sudden emissions, backward-facing tails, lost spacecraft data, delayed releases from space agencies, and together they form a pattern that no natural model explains cleanly. That's why many researchers now refer to this idea as the weaponized cyanide hypothesis. It's not a theory anyone wants to believe, but it fits the facts better than pretending nothing unusual is happening. And yet, this may only be one layer of a much larger mystery, one that ties Atlas not just to astronomy, but to something far more secretive. To explore that, we have to dive into one of the most controversial ideas ever whispered about space, technology, and deception. A program many conspiracy theorists call Project Blue Beam. According to its proponents, Blue Beam is a covert global initiative designed to simulate an extraterrestrial event, a staged alien arrival created through holographic projections, satellite imagery, and electromagnetic control. Whether true or not, the idea suggests a disturbing overlap between real cosmic events and human manipulation. And if Atlas is somehow connected to that narrative, then what's coming next might not just be a celestial mystery, but a human one. According to believers, the entire purpose of Project Blue Beam is to frighten humanity into submission, to make the world so afraid that nations willingly hand over their independence in exchange for global unity and protection from a manufactured alien threat. It's the ultimate deception, a false cosmic emergency designed to push people toward a single world government under the promise of safety. Most scientists and journalists dismiss this theory as fantasy, a fusion of real concerns about propaganda with the imagination of science fiction. Yet, within certain communities, the idea of blue beam remains alive, and followers even claim to recognize its activation pattern. They call it the trigger protocol. For decades, official institutions have insisted that UFOs don't exist, and that anyone claiming otherwise is mistaken. But the trigger, believers say, begins when that narrative suddenly changes. When governments start admitting that they've tracked unidentified objects. When skeptical scientists begin taking the idea of alien visitation seriously. When news anchors discuss UAPs instead of laughing about them. That shift, they claim, is the signal, the point when the illusion begins. Once people are convinced that extraterrestrial life is real, all it takes is one staged event to make the world believe the invasion has begun. It's psychological conditioning in plain sight. Years of disbelief flipped into sudden acceptance, and over the past few years, that reversal has already happened. The US government declassified Navy footage of mysterious flying objects. Pentagon officials testified publicly before Congress about unexplained aerial phenomena. Mainstream media, which once mocked UFO reports, now treats them as serious national security issues. NASA has even launched official research programs into the subject. To those who believe in blue beam, this isn't curiosity, it's preparation. They see it as the build-up to something staged, something designed. And then, almost perfectly on cue, an interstellar object like Atlas appears behaving strangely, releasing toxic gases and defying every normal rule of comet physics. Was Atlas chosen as part of the narrative? A harmless real object used to warm people up to the idea that something is out there. It's a convenient setup, too real to be dismissed, too mysterious to ignore. The story practically writes itself. First, the comets, then the contact. Here's how such manipulation would work. You don't fake the object itself. Astronomers around the world can see it. What you do is control the story about it. You release selective data, focus public attention on odd details, and build suspense. Step by step, you guide the audience from curiosity to fear. At first, it's just a comet. Then, a comet behaving oddly. Then, a comet that might be artificial. The tension grows slowly, predictably, until the world is ready for the final act, a staged revelation, whether holographic or otherwise. Technologically, the concept of blue beam isn't entirely out of reach. Satellite-based lasers could, in theory, project massive light patterns across the atmosphere. Drones could coordinate to create formations that look like fleets of spacecraft. Even sound and frequency manipulation could be used to create collective illusions, lights in the sky that people swear they saw, voices they think they heard. Add in complete media synchronization, every news channel broadcasting the same event, the same message, the same tone, and you've built the illusion of global truth. Not because everyone is lying, but because everyone is repeating what they're told. Whether such a system truly exists is debatable, but the pieces of it, the technology, the communication control, the psychological playbook undeniably do. And that's what makes the theory so unnerving. If you were trying to test such a global reaction, starting small would make perfect sense. You'd begin with something distant and harmless like a strange object in deep space. You'd observe public response, track social media behavior, measure which theories go viral. Atlas becomes your live experiment, a real-time case study in global influence. Because Atlas is real, skeptics can't simply dismiss it. They have to debate it, analyze it, and in doing so, they spread the story further. Slowly, disbelief turns to fascination, and fascination turns to expectation. The population becomes psychologically prepared for the next phase. Of course, critics point out obvious flaws. A coordinated illusion on this scale would require cooperation among dozens of governments, militaries, space agencies, and news networks. Secrets that large rarely stay hidden. Someone, somewhere, would leak the truth. And they're probably right if Blue Beam were a single master plan. But what if it isn't? What if it's not one grand conspiracy, but an emergent pattern, different organizations, each pursuing their own agendas, all discovering that fear of the unknown is the perfect tool for control? They wouldn't even have to coordinate. They just need to act in ways that serve their shared interest: power, funding, and influence. In that case, Atlas wouldn't need to be part of a master plan. It would simply be an opportunity, a mystery that powerful players can spin to their advantage. The perfect distraction, the perfect story. Maybe Project Blue Beam is fiction. Maybe Atlas is nothing more than a comet behaving badly. But when patterns begin to align, when stories, reactions, and timing all move in sync, it's worth asking one uncomfortable question. Who benefits? And as we'll soon see, Atlas may not even be the first sign of something larger. Because scattered across the sky are clues that suggest a pattern older, stranger, and far more haunting than any single conspiracy. It begins not with comets, but with the stars themselves. Beatrice Villa-Hull's work began quietly, deep in the archives of old observatories. She spent years poring over glass photographic plates, fragile negatives from telescopes that once captured the sky on emulsion throughout the 20th century. Her goal was simple but bold: to find stars that once appeared in those images, but no longer exist in the modern digital sky. She called her project Vasco Vanishing, and appearing sources during a century of observations. What she uncovered was astonishing. In comparing Historicus Naval Observatory data with present-day surveys, she found around 100 sources that once glowed like ordinary stars in the 1950s, but have now completely vanished. No remnant, no fading trace, just gone. Naturally, the first instinct was caution. Old photographic plates are notorious for quirks. Emulsion can degrade over time. Random cosmic rays can leave false bright spots. Chemicals used in developing the film sometimes create ghost dots or blemishes. Even a tiny speck of dust on the glass can masquerade as a distant sun. But Villa-Hull's team was thorough. They removed obvious artifacts, cross-checked data from different observatories, and only kept cases that appeared consistently across multiple exposures. When the dust cleared, they were left with a small but stubborn group of disappearances that no simple technical explanation could account for. These objects had been real sources of light, and now they were simply not there. So what happened to them? Astronomy offers a few natural ideas. Some could have been stars that briefly flared into visibility before collapsing again into darkness, what scientists call failed supernova. Others might have been optical illusions, reflections, or variable stars that dimmed below the limits of modern surveys. There are even calibration issues where distant galaxies can appear as bright dots in older data, but are too faint to detect clearly today. Yet even after all that analysis, a handful of these vanishing points remain completely unaccounted for. They behaved like stars, but they don't seem to be stars anymore. And that's where the mystery deepens. What if, just hypothetically, not all of these lights were natural? What if some were artificial? Imagine objects placed in space decades ago, small, controlled light sources designed to appear as distant stars to early telescopes. They could have been beacons, probes, or observation devices operating quietly during the mid-20th century, disguised among the constellations. When their mission ended, they powered down or left. How would anyone notice? Those old plates couldn't tell the difference between a star and a perfectly steady artificial light. To the naked eye, and to our instruments of that era, both would look identical. A tiny point of white against the infinite black. Maybe that's all they ever were, ordinary stars behaving oddly. Or maybe, just maybe, some of those lost lights weren't stars at all. And if even one of them wasn't, then perhaps the mystery of Atlas isn't the beginning of a story, but the continuation of one that started long ago, written not in words, but in the silent flicker of vanishing stars. The universe, it seems, still knows how to keep its secrets.